The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold. And the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody want clout.
Welcome to the Week 5 edition of the Rearview Mirror podcast. We are going to look back at everything in our rearview mirror that we saw in Week 4. We're going to understand it, break it down, figure out why teams won, why teams lost, how they won or how they lost, what some of their performance indicates in terms of value for moving forward, how they overachieved, how they underachieved, what their true numbers look like when you break down the box score, break down some of the advanced metrics behind that box score, and really get a better understanding of those teams and how they are built and how they can move forward. This podcast is unique from that perspective. I think it's very valuable, and we've already seen some of the fruit of this podcast play out. Particularly, we can look at even just a couple of games this past weekend when we talk about, for instance, the Chicago Bears and their defense. We can also look at the New England Patriots and their offense. We have been pointing out, I've been telling you in this podcast, by breaking down some of those teams, why some of their box scores may have been misleading, why there's some value there in thinking that those units are going to underachieve moving forward, why those teams have significant concerns in certain areas related to the Bears defense and the Patriots offense. This was shouted out after Week 2's game. This was after Week 3's game. Everybody who listened to this podcast already knew what to expect out of this New England Patriots offense when they took the field last night. Everybody already knew that the Green Bay Packers should be able to put up some great production against the Chicago Bears defense, who has been winning games with smoke and mirrors. So I think the one thing that you guys, and my goal obviously when I do this podcast, but also for my clients as a service, we were on the Green Bay Packers. We were on the Kansas City Chiefs. I was explaining to you why some of those other units would struggle. And so based upon my write-ups and the information I give my clients, as well as on this podcast in general, some of the high-level things that I'm sharing from these teams, you guys can surmise things well before other guys who don't listen to this podcast, other guys who just watch some games on TV, because the reality is not everything is crystal clear on TV. There's a lot of things that can trick you. There's a lot of things that can deceive you when you're looking at things. But when you really break down the numbers, the statistics, the analytics behind some of these wins and losses, you get a truer understanding of these teams and the players and the coaching decisions and some of the moves that they're making. It helps you out a lot to understand this game and make some money off of it if you're betting on it. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into the headlines because we've got a busy podcast to get through today. Story number one, underdog upsets in key spots. This weekend was not particularly kind to underdog bettors in general. However, to the sports books, as well as to guys who are betting the most critical underdogs of the weekend, you guys made out quite well. So let's go through exactly what games of interest matter. If you're looking at from a volume perspective in terms of the amount of action that a book is generally going to receive on games, you're number one going to jump to Monday Night Football. That's by far the biggest game that's played. Then you're going to jump to, before that, would be probably Sunday Night Football. Everybody's chasing. Then you got another primetime game on Thursday night. That's going to be a big one. And then you're going to try to isolate your top early game and your top late game of the day, which would be your 1 o'clock game. What's receiving the most unbalanced action there? Where are you most exposed? And your late game, that 4 o'clock game right before we're heading into Sunday Night Football. There's usually only a few games on then. What game there are you on the line for the most? And if you look at this past weekend, let's go through every single game. Thursday Night Football. New York Giants 3-point road underdogs come into D.C., win 45-14 outright, cover first half, full game obviously with ease. They covered the spread by 34.5 points. That was the largest margin of anybody this entire weekend in terms of covering the spread. Total blowout, destroyed anybody who was betting the Redskins any which way on this game. Then you look to we're skipped to Sunday. What's that most important 1 o'clock game Eastern time that was being played? Well, probably was the Pittsburgh Steelers hosting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're a 7-point favorite. Obviously, a lot of people would be interested in teasing that sucker down to pick them or -1. Taking the Steelers, they just need to get that victory at home. And the reality is that did not work out so well for them. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers scored 10 unanswered points in the fourth quarter to win outright 27-24, destroying every single betting option that was available, covering the spread by 10 points. So that was a big victory at 1 o'clock, got things off to a great start on Sunday for the sports books. Then you jump to the biggest game at 4 o'clock by far and away. People were betting on the Atlanta Falcons like they knew the final score. Even though they're on the road playing the Minnesota Vikings, people were not very high on the Minnesota Vikings. What happens? The Minnesota Vikings kill the Atlanta Falcons 41-28. That game was a complete blowout. The Vikings were up 24-14 at the halftime and just kept it rolling to close that game out. People got scared, wanted to chase some money probably on the Sunday night game. Looked to the short road favorite in the New Orleans Saints, laying 3 in Dallas, and they were completely stomped. Dallas was up 24-0 at halftime, destroyed every single Saint teaser parlay. Every option that you could bet on the Saints was thrown out the window on that one, and the books had a great evening on Sunday night. And then you fast forward to the Monday night game. This was the game probably of those 5 that received a little bit more public action on the underdog than the others, but needless to say, a very good result for underdog bettors who did take the Chiefs. The Patriots, you could lay 2.5 at some spots a little bit earlier in the afternoon on Monday, but I think the line closed right around 3, and the Chiefs just destroyed that number, covering the spread by 30 points and winning outright 41-14. So for the books and for some of their key decisions that they needed to have, they got almost all of them this past weekend, and so this was should have been, even though it was a bad weekend overall for dogs, there was not a single underdog who lost the game but covered the spread this weekend, which is somewhat rare. Usually you'll see a couple of those, and we did not see that. We saw dogs winning outright by big margins or dogs losing and not covering the spread. Story number 2, benching quarterbacks. We saw a lot of discussion early this week about what happened with E.J. Manuel down in Houston and how he single-handedly blew that game for the Buffalo Bills, and we'll get into that more when we break down that game, but I assure you, you'll want to stick around to listen to my analysis on that game. But when you talk about what some of these teams are doing and how they've lacked faith in their quarterbacks, I see a lot from some of the NFL personnel experts on these shows, the talking heads and whatnot, arguing in favor of keeping those quarterbacks in. There's going to be growing pains. Let them work through it. But I'm here to tell you that there's a fundamental problem with a couple of these guys, Geno Smith and E.J. Manuel, that's a little bit more evident than with some of these other young quarterbacks who may experience some growing pains. And I'm not talking about some sort of fancy analytics. I'm not talking about the passer rating where you have to factor in a bunch of different factors. I'm not talking even about basic elemental statistics like total passing yards or yards per pass attempt or touchdowns versus interceptions. I'm talking about something very basic, which all quarterbacks know they need to achieve well in, and that is completion percentage. Completion percentage is a very important statistic. It measures the accuracy of the quarterback. It measures how well they're seeing the field. There's so many things that just actual completion percentage can employ, a general understanding of what they're trying to accomplish out there and how effective they are at executing that. But one key when you're looking at completion percentage, you cannot look at it in a vacuum. And I think far too many people just look at completion percentage as a statistic alone, and they don't factor in the most important thing about completion percentage, and that is percentage of yards in the air that a pass is being thrown for. If you're throwing the ball down the field 40 yards, you're going to have a much lower completion percentage than if you're throwing a 3-yard screen pass to a running back who then runs for 20 yards after he catches that ball, as you should. It is more difficult to execute for both the quarterback and the receiver a bomb down the field than it is a short pass. So one of the key elements when you're factoring completion percentage is to understand and incorporate percentage of yardage that's coming from the air versus yardage that's coming on the ground. With that said, let me flash up this graphic for you. Go ahead, check back to the monitor, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about when we're talking about E.J. Manuel and Geno Smith. What I did here is I ranked all the quarterbacks in the NFL who have thrown for at least 90 passing attempts or 90 dropbacks, let's say. Obviously, if they get sacked, they're not throwing an attempt, but I looked at 90 dropbacks as the line. But then I also included some quarterbacks, some young quarterbacks who are competing for starting jobs, who have been starting, who are now going to be starting. When you take a look at a number of these guys here in yellow at the bottom who may have less than 90 dropbacks right now, but obviously that number is probably going to increase moving forward when you talk about Mike Glennon and Blake Bortles in particular. But what I've done here is focus on the columns in green, completion percentage, and on the far right, percentage of yardage that's coming from the air. And what I did is I just applied a very simple ratio on the far right to compare the two versus one another to get an understanding of how well are quarterbacks completing the ball versus how far down the field are they trying to throw the ball, how much of their yardage is coming from the runs after the catch versus how much of the yardage is coming from passes that are going just in the air alone. So what we see here is the two worst qualifying quarterbacks are E.J. Manuel and Geno Smith. E.J. Manuel is completing only 58% of his passes, but only 34% of his yardage is coming from yardage in the air. That means 65% of his yardage that he's passing for is coming from after the catch, guys he's throwing the ball too short, closer to the line of scrimmage, who are running for yardage. Now, of course, there's going to be a few passes that are maybe 20, 30 yards where the guy runs for another 30 yards, but still, think about the ratio. 65% of his yardage is after the catch. Only 35% of his yardage is coming on a ball that he's actually passing through the air. Geno Smith, 60% completions, and only 37% is yardage in the air. Once again, very similar numbers, and the ratio looks very similar as well between these two quarterbacks. Let's jump ahead to a lot of the young quarterbacks who are in their first year with a team, or maybe are getting starts for the first time under a new coordinator and offensive system, such as Kirk Cousins, such as Mike Glennon, who are both in their second year, third year, et cetera, and are very young into the system, like a Brian Hoyer, for instance. Let's work down the list in terms of looking at the ratio as they get from the worst to the best. Blake Bortles, he is throwing for 44.5% yards in the air. That is basically double what E.J. Manuel is throwing for. And when you look at what his completion percentage is, it's 70.5%. That is double, well, that's 10 percentage points above Geno Smith, 12 percentage points above E.J. Manuel. It's a massive difference between 58% completion and 70% completion. And he's throwing the ball further down the field as well. That is simply shocking in and of itself. Now let's look at Derek Carr. 56% of his passing yards is coming in the air, and 63% completions. Again, higher completion percentage, and much, much further down the air are his passes flying. Look at Kirk Cousins. Very similar numbers to Derek Carr, 58%, 59% completions, a little bit better in that respect, but very similar to the in terms of yards in the air, but very similar in the completion percentage. So again, both of these guys are executing an offense a lot better than what EJ and Geno are. Look at Brian Hoyer even in Cleveland. This team, you want to talk about not really having receivers. This team, without their tight end, without Josh Gordon, he's passing to nobody's out there, and he's passing for 60% of his yardage in the air, and he's completing 65% of his passes. Again, a huge difference between 65% completion and only 60% completion like Geno or 58% like EJ. Jump to Matthew McGloin. Again, he started several games for the Oakland Raiders last season as a very young player out of Penn State, very inexperienced. He got some passes this past weekend. 63% of his passing yards was coming yards in the air, and 63% of his passes were being completed. And then the last two guys on here, I'm sorry, but if you're a Buffalo Bills fan or a New York Jets fan, you just turn this podcast off right now, because you're not going to want to hear what a quarterback like Austin Davis, a third-string quarterback from St. Louis Rams, he is passing 65% of his yardage is coming in the air, and 72% of his passes are being completed. Those are ridiculous numbers, and this also speaks to, I think, large respect, those apologists out there for Sam Bradford, saying that he's being limited by his offense and he's being limited by what he was able to do. These numbers for Austin Davis are off the charts tremendous. And he is a third-string quarterback for the St. Louis Rams. And then look at Mike Glennon. Mike Glennon was up here tied with Jay Cutler in 2013, as a matter of fact. Now, I understand, and I get into when we discuss the Tampa Bay Bucs game, I'll talk all about Mike Glennon, so you can listen to that there. This is not the end-all be-all of measuring how good a quarterback is. So don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say positive or negative things about Mike Glennon. I will say he played poorly in his start against the Steelers, but ultimately rallied that team for a winning score, which is what everybody's going to look at and care about. But overall, his numbers were not very good against a very bad Steelers defense. That's besides the point for this analysis. This analysis, I'm just looking at his completion percentage versus yardage in the air to get an understanding of how accurate this quarterback is and how deep they're throwing the ball down the field. 72% of his passing yards are yardage in the air, and 58% basically completion percentage. So compare him to E.J. Manuel. Basically identical completion percentages in terms of how accurate they are in their passes. But the majority of what Mike Glennon is doing, he's throwing twice as far down the field, mostly air yardage for him. Only about 27% of his yardage is yards after the catch versus what E.J. Manuel has had to do in Buffalo. So, none of these numbers are the end-all be-all. This is not a condemnation outright that these two quarterbacks should not be in the NFL. They should not be starting games. All it is simply to open up eyes of people who say, well, you got to give a young player more time. These guys are in the second year of their offense. Their coordinators and their coaches and the ownership, I'm sure, are expecting them to grow and have growing pains. However, the fundamental thing you need to do as a quarterback is actually complete passes and to be somewhat accurate. And these guys have not shown their ability to be able to do that, and I think that's why we're having a big concern. It's not about necessarily the interceptions. It's not necessarily about the poor decision-making. Yes, you're going to have that with a young quarterback. I think these guys do have a bigger problem with that than some of these other young quarterbacks, but just the fundamental issues of accuracy and throwing the ball down the field are things that these guys struggle with. I think it's very fundamental. So with that said, we stayed a long time on this story, but certainly I think some of these numbers should open up your eyes a little bit. Moving along. Story number 3. I want to talk to you briefly about a very cool website called NFLprojects.com. This site I've already incorporated into some of my handicapping angles and analysis, and the reason is because what they do here is they show you visually in a very easy to digest and understand manner true odds for teams moving forward, not just odds to win the Super Bowl, but we're talking about odds to get certain seeds, as well as how wins or losses are affecting these teams on a weekly basis. So you can really understand how much a single loss cost a team or a win gained a team in terms of how far it moved them up and really how that affects things. I think me being an analytical, quantitative guy, I am very in tune with the numbers, the math, the algorithms, the analytics behind everything. But I don't think that you can completely ignore in your handicapping that emotion, that ability that really is hard to quantify in terms of how bad a team needs it, how much they're going to be able to rally. We see that time and time again when you have a team that's backed up at home, needs to get a win, or even sometimes teams need to get a win on the road that really can come together and form a bond and execute and do some things that you maybe didn't think they were going to be able to do or they didn't display that they were capable of in the prior weeks. And a lot of it comes down to how badly they need it, how badly they're going to be able to achieve it. So this website is very cool. You can play around with it on a weekly basis. They update everything, showing you the true odds that a team has to get to the playoffs, to get to the Super Bowl, to win their division, how each win or loss affected them from the prior week, and then you can even map out on a team-by-team basis some information. And I'm work with this in conjunction with this site, but I'm not the guy who created it. The guy who came up with the algorithm is a data scientist out in LA, a very, very intelligent guy, and I think it's a project that's very worthwhile to support and to pay attention to on a weekly basis because I can tell you I've already incorporated in some of my write-ups and some of my analysis for clients some of this information to share with them in terms of wins and losses affecting teams and week by week, how teams are moving up and down. It's not only cool to see visually because a lot of other sites might show numbers like this that, to be honest, might not be as accurate as these, but in addition, you can't really get the real feel for them as visually as these numbers are presented. And also it's worthwhile. It's capable of being used and formulated and integrated into your handicapping of games. So definitely a site to check out, NFLproject.com on a weekly basis. With that said, let's move into some of these statistics and analytics. Particularly, let's go ahead and get started with early down success rate rankings. In the last section, I touched on Geno Smith and E.J. Manuel. I threw up some charts and tables to look at how their performance was related to some of the other quarterbacks in the league, some of the other young guys. And so that was truly part of this section here on stats and charts. But so we'll leave it up there in the news and notes section. But let's jump right into these early down success rate rankings. I've updated these since last week. And as I mentioned in last week's podcast, we are now incorporating a bit more of the strength of schedule into the mix here. So let's get started right now and look at some of the teams that are the top 5 in terms of offenses. We start with the Green Bay Packers. We saw what they were able to do against the Bears. The Bears offense also very strong early down success rate numbers, and that is with some of their wide receivers not quite 100%. So against their schedule, as well as in pure offense, they've been a very strong team, much like they were last year under Mark Trestman with this offense. And it'll be interesting to see what they do because their defense is certainly, you'll see in a second, I'm giving you a hint, not doing very well. Now we move along to the Colts. Colts are another team, very similar position to the Bears, with a great early down success rate offense, but a poor early down success rate defense, something to keep an eye on when you're looking at Colts games moving forward. The New Orleans Saints. The Saints actually, their defense, despite what happened to them last week against the Dallas Cowboys team, as you can see, the Cowboys have a very strong offense. They're on the rising list down here. So they are a team whose offense is really starting to produce. The Cowboys started off slow, as you know, ran the ball a lot against the Tennessee Titans, but now Tony Romo do too much. Now you can see they're letting Romo pass it a little bit more, really balanced, still more catering towards the run. That's helping them a lot. I read a statistic yesterday about DeMarco Murray is gained, I believe it's 344 yards on first down runs, by far and away the most in the NFL. I think number 2 guy was like 141. So you look at what the Cowboys are able to do on first down. They're running it very effectively, and they're passing it, so they're going to be a team that likely is going to be top 5 very soon if they keep up at this rate. And you look at the Saints, the Falcons, those are two teams, NFC South, very strong offensively, question marks abound defensively. It's one of the reasons that these teams try to push the tempo, try to execute well on offense, and both of them are having a lot of success doing that, at least right now. And, of course, the Giants, they're a team that is on the rise. When you look at their pure offensive numbers, not superb, but look at who they've gone up against, some of their defenses that they faced, and those numbers look a little bit more impressive, and I think as Eli Manning gets a better control over this offense, those numbers should increase even further. You look at the bottom five, the reality here, nothing really has changed tremendously, except that from last week, from the falling category, the Bucs were down in the falling category. They're now in the bottom five right now. So they've catapulted themselves into the bottom five after their performance last weekend against a very bad Steelers defense. I think that's the reason to consider it. This is not the Steelers defense of old. This is a bad Steelers defense. And while they got the outright victory, they were not impressive offensively throughout the course of the game, particularly from an early down success rate. When you look at some of these other teams, again, I'm not going to say a whole lot about them because they were on this list last week and we touched on all of them. But the Patriots, as I alluded to in the opener, this is a team I've been calling out to you guys for weeks now about this offense. Everybody's going to talk about them after last night's game, but we are the guys who have been talking about how inefficient this team has been since the opening week. And I think a lot of people out there probably thought, oh, well, that game against the Miami Dolphins, they really looked bad. And that was their takeaway. They looked bad. And then they came back in week two and they won, and people stopped thinking about this Patriots offense. But I pointed out week two, that offense was not very efficient. Week three, that offense was very bad from an efficiency perspective. And so they are deserving of this bottom five. And I think more people are agreeing with it now. But the key is, as you guys know, be one step ahead of the game. That's what we do here. Try to get some value before everybody finds out about things like that. And then when everybody starts to overreact, you have to sometimes go the opposite direction. So that's the way you have to play this thing, is stay ahead of the game, stay ahead of the public and the books as well. You look at teams that are falling. The Texans were up there in the bottom five. I think they're going to be close to borderline this entire year. I mean, they're like right outside the bottom five right now. Not a very good early on success rate offense, not a very good quarterback. And the New York Jets, well, we already mentioned Geno Smith, and his struggles are playing into the New York Jets being in this predicament that they find themselves in here, which is one of the worst teams in the league offensively. Let's jump ahead to the defenses. Here you can see the top five defenses. Yes, the Jets are there, even though their secondary has been abysmal in many cases. They are a top five early on success rate defense. Some of these teams are similar to what they were last week in terms of the Dolphins. The Seahawks and the Ravens moved up a little bit, even though they played the Denver Broncos. That certainly was still a strong defensive performance, but for that final drive. Last weekend they were on a bye. This past week 4, but this was a defense that is on the rise, and just now, because of their strength of schedule, up into the top five, but they're basically the number 5 position in the league. If you look at a couple teams that are rising, the Bengals certainly, Bengals from a pure perspective are right in the middle of the pack, but they face the Atlanta Falcons, and that's a very strong offense. And so this team has catapulted themselves up to fighting distance away from the top 5. They're on the rise. And the Denver Broncos, a team that did not look very strong week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks, but has since turned things around a little bit from a defensive perspective. It's going to be quite interesting to see exactly how this defense does against an Arizona offense that is a little bit underrated, but can be very efficient under Bruce Arians. So that's going to be an interesting game to watch this weekend. If you look at bottom 5 defenses, I hinted at the Bears and the Colts. These teams are very bad, number 32 and 31 in the league in early down success rate defense, allowing teams to jump from first down to first down pretty often. It's not the end-all be-all defensive statistic, but it certainly weighs into things heavily when you're talking about overall defensive efficiency. The Texans, again, another surprising team that a lot of people think has a good defense. The reality is they are very good on third down. That is what they've been good at, but they have not been good on an early down success rate basis. Steelers and the Rams, they were there last week. Titans now join the list as a team that's been falling, and certainly after that game against the Colts last weekend, you can understand why they are now included on here. And the Raiders, obviously, that game against think about how the Raiders looked against the New England Patriots last week in terms of their defense, allowing Brady to score only 16 points. People thought, hey, maybe this Raiders defense is good. No, they go over to London. Miami Dolphins completely exposed them. You can really understand how far away this Patriots offense is just from that performance alone right there. But this team is on the fall defensively and might be in the bottom 5 for that pretty soon. So that's all we're going to do about the stats and charts this week. We talked a little bit about the quarterbacks in the prior section, early on success rate here. We'll move more into this on a week-to-week basis where we have more time to talk about this, but it's already chock full of information podcast, so I want to get right down into the game breakdowns because I have a lot to add this week as we get more and more statistics and trends being able to be incorporated based on more games being played, and some things are becoming a little bit more clear with these teams. So we'll get right into that. And the other thing I want to add before we move into that is one of the reasons why it's important to look at things from a game-by-game basis is because you can really get a better idea of a trend that a team might be entering. Because year-to-date statistics are obviously great and helpful. These stats here, these charts, top 5, bottom 5, and every other stat that you see that summarizes how teams are on a year-to-date basis, very helpful. But teams change over the course of a year. Injuries occur. Teams start playing differently. So you really have to look at things on a week-to-week basis, understand why a team won, why they lost, and to really formulate your what to expect from this team in their very next game, because that's really what we're caring about right now is what do we expect from this team next week? And some of that is what did they do last week? It's almost, I don't want to say it's 50-50. I'm not going to throw a percentage on it, but you can't just look at year-to-date and throw out last week. You also can't just look at last week and throw out year-to-date. You have to incorporate them both, and if you just look at last week based on what you saw on TV, you're really going to miss the boat. If you just look at year-to-date statistics, you have to break down last week, as we're going to do right now, breaking these games down. Let's dig right into the Redskins matchup at home versus the Giants from Thursday night. This was the largest ATS cover of the week from the Giants. They were a 3.5-point dog, and they won outright by 31 points, therefore covering the spread by 34.5 points. This was a very strong performance from the Giants team, and I think we're seeing this team start to come around the corner here with their new offensive coordinator, Bob McAdoo. Eli Manning is picking up this offense quite well, in large part because the Redskins defense was overrated heading into this one, putting up some good stats against some bad teams the last couple of weeks. Obviously, the Eagles were a good offense they faced, but other than that, they were putting up good numbers versus bad offenses. And you look at what they did to the Giants here. Eli Manning completed 72% of his passes for 7.6 yards per attempt. Even with one interception, he had a 117 passer rating. The Giants offense was also able to rush for 4.1 yards per carry, which was only 15th in the league this past weekend. So they weren't tremendous on the ground, but they got some good carries when they needed to get them. Mainly, they were extremely efficient and dominated time of possession, as well as first downs and total yardage because of all those turnovers from Kirk Cousins. We got the chance to see him start, and this was one of the reasons why his starts didn't go tremendously successful historically in terms of what he's been able to do on the Redskins. But the team as a whole completed the second fewest third down percentage in terms of the rate they converted. They only converted 13% of their third downs into first down. The Giants were up at 69%. That was second best. The Giants had the second most first downs of the weekend. So this game was really a story of an offense that was executing efficiently, as well as a defense that was allowing them to move up and down the field, coupled with an offense that was just giving the ball back to the Giants. Kirk Cousins ends up with a 40 passer rating, which was the worst in the NFL this past weekend. Jumping ahead to a game that I think I really anticipated this happening. This is why I played the Packers. This is the Packers-Bears game. The Bears allowed, as I mentioned to my clients, 6 red zone attempts for the New York Jets last Monday night, and the Jets only converted one of those, and I suggested that if they allow the Packers to get the same type of yardage and into the red zone that many times, they're going to do a lot better than converting just 1 of 6, and sure enough, Aaron Rodgers and the Packers offense got into the Bears red zone 5 times and walked away with 4 touchdowns. That's 80% conversion rate in the red zone. We know that Jay Cutler threw a couple of bad interceptions in this one, but let's not be mistaken that this game was basically won by the Packers via their offense, and sure, the interceptions definitely aided in that, but if you look at what Aaron Rodgers did to this defense, this Bears defense, I said, was on the brink of being exposed for who they are. Aaron Rodgers, 79% completions. That was first in the NFL. He threw for 10.8 yards per attempt. That was also first in the NFL. His 4 touchdowns, combined with those prior statistics, gave him a 151 passer rating. That was tops in the NFL, obviously the maximum possible, I think, is 153.8. So he was very borderline to the best passing game that is possible. When you look at what this offense did from a yards per play standpoint, even though they only ran for 3.1 yards per carry, which was one of the worst results in the league, they still earned a 7.6 yards per play. That was tops in the league. So the Bears, one of the things they did good, I knew that the Packers defense was susceptible. The Bears were able to finally get the run game going. They actually rushed for 235 yards on 41 carries. That's a massive output from the Bears ground game. They rushed for 5.7 yards per carry. That was second most in the NFL this past weekend. So they were extremely solid there. But the Bears offense, got hung up a little bit in the red zone, went 2 of 4 in the red zone, and with the 2 turnovers, you're not going to be able to beat the Green Bay Packers when that offense is clicking so well and when your defense is allowing them to click so well. Both of these teams ranked number 1 and number 2 on the week in terms of early down success rate, so they were very efficient, very frequently bypassing third downs entirely, and one of the interesting statistics in this game was that the Bears actually controlled the ball for 36 and a half minutes compared to the Packers controlling it for only 23 and a half minutes. So the Bears, the 4th biggest time gap in terms of time of possession, but they were not there because they were running the ball and chewing up the clock, and the Packers were throwing the ball all over them, and with the turnovers and with the red zone efficiency from Green Bay, it allowed them to win this game quite easily, 38-17. Moving to a late game out on the West Coast, we had the Chargers hosting the Jaguars, and this was a game I took the over in this game and anticipated Bortles sort of leading a spark for the Jaguars, and sure enough, he was able to pass the ball. He completed 78% of his passes. That was actually second best in the NFL this past weekend. He did throw 2 interceptions, but he did lead the Jaguars to 2 for 2 conversions inside of the red zone. Now, I anticipated him being a solid double agent for us in terms of his passing. Either he lead to some big plays and some scores for the Jaguars, or give the Chargers some good field position. And we saw a little bit of both of that to help aid in this game going over the total. Now, this game actually saw a ridiculous performance in terms of getting towards that total up through the first 4 minutes into the second half. And after that point in time, the Chargers only combined to kick 3 more field goals to get us over the point total that was necessary. But the Chargers, this game could have gone over by a lot more. The Chargers went 0 for 4 in the red zone, so that was obviously the worst in the NFL. And neither offense, to be honest, was great from a total first downs or a early down success rate or third down conversion. But one of the things that we did see from the Chargers was efficiency from Phillip Rivers in that passing game, which I anticipated going in. He threw for 74% completions, which was 4th best in the NFL, 9.4 yards per attempt. That was 6th best, and 129 passer rating. That was 4th best. They could not run the ball at all on the Jaguars. However, the Jaguars went in with the mindset of stopping the run, and they certainly did with Donald Brown as the running back for the Chargers. Obviously, we know that they had issues with Danny Woodhead being injured, with Ryan Matthews being injured, but the Jaguars held them to only 2.1 yards per carry on the ground, a total of 42 rushing yards and 20 carries. So that was a big win for this Jaguars run defense, but they could not stop Phillip Rivers passing the ball in the air, and led to a very easy win and a 6-point cover for the huge favorite, the San Diego Chargers at home. Jumping down to the Colts and the Titans, this is a game I teased the Colts in this one and ended up being pretty easy. You could have laid the points here instead, but the Colts racked up the second most first downs. They had the 3rd best early down success rate. They went 3 for 3 in goal to go, 4 of 6 in the red zone, scoring 5 total touchdowns. Andrew Luck, very efficient with the ball, 9.6 yards per pass on 71% completions, 5th best passer rating. Here is the story of another team in the Colts that just could not run the ball at all on this Titans defense. They ran it 41 times, so they kept running and running and running, gained only 105 yards. That was only 2.6 yards per rush, so that rate's 2nd worst in the league this past weekend. However, that controlled the clock and kept the Titans on the bench, their offense on the bench. This was the biggest discrepancy. The Colts actually had the ball offensively for 42 and a half minutes. Titans only had it for 17 and a half minutes. Obviously, that's a huge disparity. And the Colts were able to have Andrew Luck pass the ball when they needed him to pick up first downs, and they ran it to chew up the clock, and it ended up being a very easy win. The Colts got after the Titans. Obviously, they're starting a backup quarterback there, and they sacked him 3 times. They won the turnover battle 3-1, but this was just a all-out home domination for the Indianapolis Colts, who certainly are looking in good position in that division currently, but now they host the very strong Baltimore Ravens next weekend, so that'll be an interesting battle. Moving along to the Cowboys versus the Saints. This is an exciting game on Sunday night, and if you've been listening to this podcast for the last several weeks, you're already on top of this. You already understand exactly the way the Cowboys have been winning these games and how they've been performing despite their defense being lackluster and not all that great. And certainly you and I were both prepared for what we saw on Sunday night to an extent, which was a very efficient effort out of the Dallas Cowboys. We know that they were very strong running the ball heading into this game, and we know that the Saints, this was a team that was winning games when they did win based upon their offense and not based upon their defense. Their defense was having problems, so I don't think it surprised you or I that the Saints struggled to stop this efficient Cowboys offense. But let's take a look real quick at their efficiency, starting with their running game, which was obviously the fundamental manner in which they tried to attack the New Orleans Saints. They ran the ball 35 times, 190 yards, 5.4 yards per carry. That was the 6th best ranking in the NFL this past weekend. When you look at what Tony Romo did to complement that, once again, they saw fewer pass attempts than they did rush attempts, which is new under this Jason Garrett offense this year. And Tony Romo, when he was asked to pass, passed extremely efficiently. He passed the ball for 76% completions. That's 4th best in the NFL this past week. 8.8 yards per attempt, 136 passer rating, which is 4th best. He had 3 passing touchdowns and no interceptions. So a very efficient effort out of Tony Romo and his Cowboys offense. When you look at the flip side, it's not that the Cowboys defense completely shut down the Saints. It's that they shut them down enough at the beginning of the game, which allowed the Cowboys to dictate down and distance to the Saints towards the end of the game. When the Saints had the ball, not only were they playing the Dallas Cowboys defense, they were playing the amount of time left in the game. They were also playing the scoreboard because they were so far behind. They needed to gain yardage in chunk plays and more situations that made it easier for the Dallas Cowboys to run a defense. And so as a result, you may take a look at this average and say, well, the Saints ran for 8 yards per carry against the Cowboys. That's true. However, they only ran the ball 13 times. The reason they could only run the ball 13 times is A, the Cowboys had it the rest of the game, but B, the Saints were so far behind that they had to pass the ball. They couldn't just sit there and run the ball. So this is a prime example of where some statistics can be misleading. Yes, the Cowboys allowed 8 yards per rush to the Saints. However, that ultimately didn't factor into this game. Now, maybe moving forward, it could play a bigger role, but those were some big runs by the Saints late in the game when the Cowboys were playing prevent defense. Not really a factor in this game. The bigger factor, obviously, Drew Brees, he played pretty efficiently. When you look at some of his totals, he did throw 1 interception, but 73% completions when throwing 44 attempts is pretty strong given the number of attempts is high. 7.6 yards per attempt and 334 total yards, and 100 passer rating. None of those numbers are terrible out of Drew Brees, but just like when they played in Cleveland and they started off very slow and he piled up a lot of statistics in the second half and trying to mount a comeback, that's primarily what we saw here. We saw the Cowboys controlling the game, controlling the ball, getting big chunk plays in the first half to run up a halftime score, 24-0. I was tweeting out during the game. You can follow me at Sharp Football on Twitter about how this was the biggest margin of deficit at halftime, how the Saints rarely scored 0 points at halftime with Sean Payton and Drew Brees. So this is a big margin of lead for the Cowboys at halftime. Really helped ice things. Obviously, the Saints got back into it to an extent in the second half. I think they trailed by only a touchdown at one point late in the game, but then the Cowboys were able to pull away even further after the Saints mounted a little mini rally. So this is a very strong effort from the Dallas Cowboys, and I think something that we're going to expect out of them moving forward is the same type of game plan, controlling tempo, using the run game, take pressure off of Tony Romo in his back, take pressure off of that defense, and that actually makes Romo more dangerous when he's not throwing the ball all game long because he gets more opportunities downfield with better coverages dictated when they're running the ball so effectively to start the game. Let's jump to probably the biggest game of the afternoon, which was the Eagles at the 49ers. This was a game, again, if you've been listening to this podcast, you understand how the 49ers offense has seen their share of struggles, and once again, they struggled definitely in this game. Colin Kaepernick, just 6.3 yards per attempt. That was 21st in the league. 57% completions. That was 21st in the league this past weekend. So those numbers were not very strong out of him. When you look at what they did on the ground, they finally were able to get back to the ground, and that's what I anticipated them doing after hardly any rushing attempts versus the Arizona Cardinals. They ran the ball 42 times, and it wasn't just a lot of running for minimal yardage. They ran it and gained 5.2 yards per carry to total 218 rushing yards, one of the largest yardage outputs of any team this past weekend, and that's really what helped this team maintain time of possession. When you look at time of possession, this was the second largest time differential in the league. The 49ers had the ball for basically 43 minutes, keeping the Eagles down to 17 minutes. That's a huge advantage for this 49ers offense. The other thing they did, to be expected to an extent due to the offensive line injuries, but questioned due to the 49ers defensive line, was how Nick Foles is going to do in the pocket, how effective he was going to be. But much like the Washington Redskins did to this Eagles offense last week, the week before this one, when they shut down the ground game and forced it on to Nick Foles, the 49ers were able to do the same exact thing. Oddly, the Eagles, who were basically the league's best rushing team last season, ran the ball just 12 times and gained only 22 yards to 1.8 yards per rush. Horrible numbers. And so the burden fell onto Nick Foles. Now, when you think that the team only ran the ball 12 times, you would think that probably Foles had 50 or 60 pass attempts, but the reality is because he had the ball so infrequently, he still was only able to throw the ball 43 times, but he had a 49% completion percentage. That was the third worst in the league this weekend for 4.4 yards per pass attempt. That was the worst in the league this past weekend. So it was a miserable offensive performance. The Eagles only had 11 first downs. That was the worst in the NFL this weekend. They also have the worst early down success rate. Early down success rate, they went to first down only 11 times and had to go to 13 third down attempts. That's pretty pitiful for an offense as effective and efficient as Chip Kelly usually is. So this game is actually even more lopsided than the box score shows. We've seen the Eagles have some struggles and come back in games before, but truthfully, this box score, for what the 49ers defense did and what the Eagles offense could not do, this box score was even more lopsided. If the 49ers offense could have executed just a margin better, it would have been a much bigger victory here. Consider this, the Eagles only got down to the 49ers red zone once the entire game. This is the Eagles offense. And 49ers got to the Eagles red zone 3 times. They only converted once for a touchdown. So this was a game the 49ers likely should have won by a larger margin. So consider that moving forward. Next game, the Jets versus the Lions. This was a game in a home game for the Jets where neither offense looked tremendous, and in fact, the Jets experienced some of the same difficulties that they saw the last couple of weeks, which primarily originates from a poor quarterback, Geno Smith, 52% completions, 6.2 yards per pass attempt, and 68 passer rating with 1 interception. All of those were basically like the third or fourth worst performance of the weekend. They were able to run the ball for 4.9 yards per carry, were the Jets, against this Lions defense. So that was a big question mark heading into this game, given the fact that the Detroit Lions had such a great front 4 and front 7. Would they be able to stop the run? Because clearly that's what the Jets want to do when their quarterback struggles. But they were able to run the ball on this Detroit Lions defense, 4.9 yards per carry, 27 attempts, 132 total yards. So overall, from the ground game, it was good. From the passing game, it was bad. And when you factor in that the Lions did not turn the ball over at all, and the Jets turned it over twice, 1 interception and 1 fumble, that's basically, they have a touchdown win for the Detroit Lions. And it comes down to those turnovers ultimately because neither team was very effective. Ironically, the stats are exactly the same. Both teams only had 17 first downs. Both teams had to go to third down 15 times. Both teams have the exact same early down success rate, which was among the worst of any team in the week. So not tremendous statistics, 12 total punts, 6 each team. So the real difference here was the turnovers. The Lions offense, Matt Stafford, he played pretty well. We know that his Jets secondary is not the best. The good thing is Stafford didn't throw any interceptions. He was sacked 4 times, but He threw 71% completions, 8 yards per attempt, 114 passer rating, including 2 passing touchdowns. So he did a good job, and when it comes down to it, that's what matters. A good quarterback versus a bad quarterback, and turnovers can lead to a road victory, even against a defensive line that's as good as the New York Jets is. Now, let's jump over to this game over in London, the Raiders versus the Dolphins. This was the game I used the Dolphins in some things on my end from a contest perspective, and certainly satisfied there with the results. The Raiders really struggled, and I questioned, which team is going to show up in this game, and I predicted that the Dolphins did not get a good result. It was going to be a really terrifying week there on their bye, and if the Raiders did not get a result, that their coach probably was going to get fired, and the reality is that their coach did in fact get fired. But when you look at what the Raiders did offensively, it was not good. They turned the ball over 4 times. Well, the Dolphins turned it over 3 times, so that international audience got to watch 7 total turnovers in this game. A very, very sloppy game, but the Dolphins only punted it twice. Ryan Tannehill finally had a good game against this Raiders defense. He's been struggling with his completion percentage, with his yards per attempt, but here, 74% completion percentage, 9 yards per attempt. Even with 1 interception, he still had 109 passer rating, so that was very good. Raiders quarterback play struggled, only 6 yards per attempt. That was the 3rd worst this weekend, and a 67 passer rating. So when you look at the yards per play, the Dolphins actually had almost 2 more yards per play, and they scored 5 total touchdowns. They were the 4th best team in early down success rate this past weekend, whereas the Raiders were the 6th worst team. So this game ended up being perhaps a bigger blowout than the box score indicates, but it was a solid victory by the Dolphins, up 17 at halftime and 31 by the end of the 3rd quarter. A very easy victory and cover ultimately for them. When the Panthers came to visit the Ravens in a rematch of the Steve Smith game, this was a complete domination by the Baltimore Ravens, and even more surprising is this Panthers defense. This defense started off the season looking so strong, and a lot of people surmised this would be able to carry them this year, even with the difficulties from their quarterback position. Cam starting out the season injured and not even playing the first weekend, as well as the lack of depth along the wide receivers. But this defense has really started to unravel. Joe Flacco always plays pretty good at home, but he played tremendous, especially against this bad defense. He threw for 10.5 yards per pass attempt at 137 passer rating. Both were 3rd best in the league this past weekend, and he obviously did not throw any interceptions, threw 3 passing touchdowns, a couple to Steve Smith. They, in total, ran for 4.2 yards per rush, and that combined to form a 7.5 yards per play compared to a 5.0 yards per play for the Carolina Panthers. Both teams were very good on 3rd down, which is kind of interesting given the fact that the Ravens have a very good defense too, but the Panthers were able to convert 67% of their 3rd down attempts, whereas the Ravens 77%. So both defenses struggled to get off the field on 3rd down. That's why there was very few punts in the game this weekend. But in total, it basically came down to the fact that the Panthers turned the ball over 1 more time than the Ravens did, and the performance from the quarterback position. I mean, Joe Flacco, it was impossible for the Carolina Panthers to overcome his efficiency, and when they can't get off the field on 3rd down and you're converting 77% against them, that's a huge problem too. And last but not least, a funny note to add to this game, prior to the game, Steve Smith made some comments that made the media about Cam Newton and his lack of vision in the red zone, and he's never going to be a good quarterback as a result of that. As it turns out, the Panthers did get into the Ravens red zone 3 times, converted 0 touchdowns in those 3 red zone trips. So perhaps Steve Smith was onto something there with Cam Newton and the Carolina Panthers. Moving along to the arch rival of the Baltimore Ravens, that is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who lost at home to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's a very interesting game when you watch it because you initially see the Steelers struggling, turnover leads to 7 points quickly for the Bucs. Ben did not play particularly bad. He did throw for 73% completions, 305 total yards, 7.4 yards per attempt, a pass rating of 118. And so you're thinking, well, that sounds pretty good because they should have been able to run the ball pretty effectively too to balance out the pass game, and that would have been able to do enough against the Bucs. However, the Bucs defense prevented them from running. The Steelers offense, which likes to use LeGarrette Blount, which likes to use Le'Veon Bell, was only able to run the ball for 85 total yards on 27 rush attempts. That's 3.1 yards per rush. That was 19th in the league this past weekend. So they could not run the ball very effectively, and the Steelers only converted 43% on 3rd down. So they were not able to do enough against this Buccaneers defense to allow them to maintain drives. As a result, they punted 4 times, and they got down to the Bucs red zone 3 times. They converted 2 touchdowns. So you think that might be good percentages, but look at the volume because the Bucs actually got down to the Steelers red zone 5 times and converted 3 of them. So there's 7 extra points right there from those conversions. Also time of possession for the Bucs when they're driving down into the Steelers red zone like that. The Bucs defense sacked Ben Roethlisberger 5 times. So we mentioned they stopped the run. They got after the quarterback just enough. While Ben still put up good numbers, they were able to get enough pressure on him to cause some negative plays in the passing game. When you look at what Glennon did offensively, it's definitely nothing to write home about here. I know a lot of people were wondering, how's Glennon going to look? How's he going to do? Will he perform better? The answer actually was he did not perform much better. Obviously, you're going to turn to the one thing that made a difference, and that was the drive at the end to win this game for the Buccaneers. Yes, that was a tremendous job. However, when you look at the stats, 49% completions, that was the 3rd worst of the week, 19th in yards per pass attempt at 6.7, and a 76 passer rating, which was 19th in the league. He did throw one interception. He did throw 2 passing touchdowns. So his numbers were certainly not off the charts. And keep in mind, this is a Steelers defense that actually is not good. They've lost multiple players. They're actually a very bad defense, particularly with the injuries they suffered last weekend. So I expected even more out of Mike Glennon than he did in this game. But when it comes down to it at the end of the day for the Bucs, he did enough for them to get the win, and the defense did enough to stop the Steelers' offense and to slow them down. That said, the Steelers still gained 27 first downs, but it just was not enough. Some well-timed plays by this Bucs defense, and obviously well-timed plays from the quarterback position were enough to get this victory. And now the Steelers have to play another team viewed as one of the worst in the league, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they have to do that on the road this upcoming weekend as a 7-point favorite. So that game should be extremely interesting. When you look at the Texans and the Bills, this was probably one of the most difficult games to watch of the weekend, and but for my being on the Bills in this one, I would not have been really paying as close attention to this game as I did. As it turned out, both teams played poorly on where it really mattered the most, which was on third down. Texans only converted 36%. The Bills only 31%. When you look at early down success rate, we know this about the Texans. If you've been listening to this podcast for weeks, you know this as well. The Texans were a team defensively and offensively that did not perform very well on first or second down, but really stepped it up on third down and performed really well on third down, whether it was offense or defense. So here, offensively, they did not perform well on third down. Defensively, they did. They held the Bills down. But in large part, that was due to the quarterback position. E.J. Manuel, just an absolute horrendous day. When you look at this, the Bills actually led by 10 points. They were playing very strongly throughout the initial stages of this game into the third quarter when E.J. Manuel threw a pick six as they were driving for a touchdown to increase the lead even larger. He was just terrible. When you look at it, 5 yards per attempt, that was second worst in the league. 48% completions, that was the worst in the league this past weekend for a 59 passer rating because he threw 2 interceptions. He was sacked twice. So Bills decided they're going to go a different direction at quarterback, and certainly will bear monitoring how Orton does in replacement of EJ. But I disagree with the people who are saying that the Bills should not have made a change. The Bills shouldn't just keep sticking it out with this quarterback. History is your guide when you're looking at this player. I don't know if he's your franchise guy, but you want to spark some things up, and personally, I don't find it a problem to bench a young quarterback just for a little while, let him get his head on straight, think about what he's doing wrong, try to refocus. You're talking about arguments of, you might hurt his confidence. Look, he lost that game for the Bills this past weekend. I don't know how really you can hurt his confidence any worse than him pretty much being the sole player responsible for them losing a game on the road when the defense played quite well. Defense held the Texans to just one trip to the red zone. Think about that. Texans got into the Bills' red zone just once. Ryan Fitzpatrick threw 2 interceptions. The Bills' defense held the Texans' offense to 1.5 yards per rush. That is a pitiful number, obviously the worst of the weekend. The Bills, on 24 rushing attempts for the Texans, they gained a total of 37 yards. They only ran it 24 times because they didn't want Ryan Fitzpatrick to be throwing the ball because he kept throwing interceptions. That's how bad this Texans' offense was against the Bills, yet pretty much entirely due to E.J. Manuel, because when you look at it, the Bills were able to run the ball. They ran 23 times for 96 yards. That's 4.2 yards per carry, almost 3 times more than what the Texans were getting from their ground game. So it really was entirely on the quarterback in this game. I certainly felt that way watching it when the +3 ended up losing by 6 points. That's exactly what I felt was the quarterback was the one who lost this game for them. So I don't fault them for wanting to try to spark the team and give them an extra shot here in the arm with Kyle Orton at quarterback. And if Kyle Orton fails, hey, you put back EJ, and hopefully he's had time to reanalyze the way he's thinking about things out there on the field, because his decision-making is questionable and his accuracy is questionable, and there's a lot of things this young guy needs to work on. And if you're just going to throw him out there when you might have an option in Kyle Orton, who could actually, in this division this year, more than any other year, is wide open when you're looking at the struggles of the New England Patriots, the New York Jets, they don't have a quarterback either. The Miami Dolphins are up and down week to week. This is a division that's wide open, it seems like, at this point. I don't fault the Buffalo Bills for trying to make a change here. When you look at a game that certainly all of the sports books love, I think the best game of the weekend was the Vikings versus the Atlanta Falcons. This was a very offensive game. It seemed as though neither defense was doing a tremendous job in this one, and that's why we saw the fireworks on the scoreboard as we did. So let's look at it from the beginning. The Vikings, 26 first downs, the Falcons 23. Both of those were top 10 in the league. Both teams top 15 in terms of early down success rate, although the Vikings basically were twice as many ranking spots above what the Atlanta Falcons were in early down success rate. Although when they did get to third down, the Falcons converted 67% against this Minnesota Vikings defense on the road, outdoors. So that's a very strong sign, even though they lost this game, for the Falcons to convert 67% on the road against the defense that's not the best, but not the worst in the Minnesota Vikings. I think that's something positive they can take away from this game, is they played at least well on third down on the road. Key here, though, the Falcons only got into the Minnesota Vikings red zone once. They did convert that for a touchdown. In total, they had 4 touchdowns on the day, but these were generally from big plays, whereas the Vikings got down to the Falcons' red zone 6 times and converted 4 of them for a touchdown. So Falcons' defense allowing the Vikings into the red zone early and often and converting at a pretty strong rate. The Vikings also tacked on 2 out of 3 field goal attempts to total their 41 points. when you look at what they were doing from a passing standpoint, it wasn't huge bombs down the field by Bridgewater, but there was a lot of stuff that opened up for him after the catch. 10.6 yards per pass attempt, 317 total passing yards. He actually did not throw a single passing touchdown. That's why his 99 passer rating was not higher, because his numbers bear out the fact that it should have been a lot higher had he thrown 1 or 2 passing touchdowns, but they had 4 rushing touchdowns. They did have the second best yards per play total in the weekend, 7.5 yards per play. When you look at what the Falcons defense was giving up, they allowed this Vikings ground game, which obviously has question marks behind Matt Asiata, to run 44 times for 241 yards. That's 5.5 yards per attempt. Both of these teams ran extremely well, because the Atlanta Falcons ran for 5.6 yards per attempt. So we actually had the number 3 and number 4 rushing performance this past weekend up in Minnesota when these two teams squared off against one another. So I think some takeaways from this game for me personally: the defense of the Vikings against a good offense like the Falcons was not really up to par in terms of the entire game playing strong. I think the Falcons showed that they can play well on the road, and they've gone on the road a couple times to play pretty badly. This was a game they actually played pretty well. It just didn't reflect on the scoreboard. The Vikings coming along under Teddy Bridgewater, I think it'll be interesting to see if he's healthy enough to play on Thursday against the Green Bay Packers, but this kid is more than capable of leading this offense right now in his career, and I was very impressed by this offense, because if you look at the way they perhaps thought they would have to beat the Falcons, with their strong defensive effort to control Matt Ryan and keep these receivers in check. The reality was these receivers ran wild on them. Matt Ryan had a good game overall, though he did throw 2 interceptions, so that was big, but he threw 61% completions, 7.0 yards per attempt. Neither of those numbers are tremendous, but neither of them are terrible either. But when you allow the Falcons to run for 5.6 yards per carry, you're probably thinking that your defense is not living up to what you hoped it would, and that was probably the case, barring those 2 interceptions. The Vikings defense did not play the way Mike Zimmer anticipated, but that stress was taken away when Teddy Bridgewater and this Vikings offense played as good as they did. So that was extremely impressive. Jumping to the Monday night game, this was the Chiefs and the Patriots, and this was one of the most surprising losses that you'll ever see in pro football. Something that I anticipated the Chiefs would do well in this game. Obviously, we won our teaser on the Chiefs. Didn't even need that. Used the Chiefs +3 in some contests, but we didn't even need that either. I mean, they won outright by 27 points. I was very surprised as to how bad this Patriots defense actually looked on the field. Everybody is going to be talking, as rightly so, about the Patriots offense and how the Patriots offense struggled and did not play well. But when you actually allow the Chiefs offense to throw for 9.1 yards per attempt, that was the 6th best in the league, you know that you're doing something wrong defensively, because they really do not have much of a downfield passing game. Most of their passes are within 10 to 15 yards from the line of scrimmage. So right there, when you're allowing this team to throw for 9 yards per attempt on 26 pass attempts, and you're allowing Alex Smith to convert 77% of his passes into completions, and you're allowing them to have the 5th best early down success rate of any team, and you're also allowing them, while they're passing the ball efficiently, to run for 5.4 yards per carry, which is the 5th best in the league, your defense has a lot of problems, and that's exactly what we saw here. A lot of it's going to fall into Tom Brady. Certainly, his performance was miserable, but this defense, I think, to me, is the bigger takeaway from the Patriots in terms of my surprise that they are playing as poorly as they are, which is Bill Belichick's specialty. He's a defensive guy, and this defense played miserably. Now, if you look at the Patriots from the offensive perspective, the main problem was their turnovers, because some of their statistics really aren't that bad, but take a look at some of these turnovers, and you're wondering how exactly did the Chiefs post this many points. Certainly I was, because I was on the under in this game, and I felt very confident in this game. I don't want to say early necessarily, because I don't like it when one of the teams will drive to a big lead, especially against a decent quarterback from the other team. We saw the same thing happen with the Saints and Cowboys game on Sunday night, where the Cowboys opened up such a big lead that it ended up leading 2 points late in the game. But for both teams, for the Saints and then the Cowboys themselves, to narrowly go over the total. But when you look at what Tom Brady did, he fumbled the ball and he threw an interception. In both cases, the Chiefs got the ball, I think, within like the 12-yard line to score touchdowns right away. One of them was a field goal, one of them was a touchdown. They scored points right away from those turnovers, so that's 10 points right there. Plus, Brady threw a pick 6 in the game, so that's 17 extra points that you're giving the Chiefs basically from horrible turnovers. That I think in one of the scores they didn't even get a first down. I think they had a couple plays and then they scored a touchdown. No first down needed. The other one, they got 1 first down, and kicked the field goal. And the third one, it was a pick 6. So right there, you're giving them 17 free points on the scoreboard out of a total of 41 points. That's basically taking away down to 24 points if you're not giving them those points, and that brings the score down to basically a 24-7 type game. When you look at the Patriots had to drive there late with their backup quarterback, that resulted in a touchdown when most of the starters were on the – well, actually not most of the starters. Some of the starters for the defense were on the bench. The Patriots actually were playing with some of their starters offensively, except for the quarterback. So they allowed Brady to rest it out and watch what he had done to the team while Jimmy Garoppolo went down and scored a touchdown. So for me, the takeaways in this game were the Patriots' defense, pretty disappointed. I anticipated that the Chiefs' defense would be enough to slow down Tom Brady in the offense. That's why I took the Chiefs. That's why I took the under. But the reality was Brady's horrible performance in the pocket is what ended up costing this game from an over perspective and gave the Chiefs a lot more points in this one than they really statistically probably deserve to have scored. And when you look at what they did last week against the Miami Dolphins, it was the same type of situation. They got a lot of points on the game, and I told you guys last week on this podcast that they scored, I think, 34 points in that game, but their stats during the game did not really reflect 34 points being scored. They had a lot of good fortune in that one as well. So this Chiefs team is going to be interesting to look at moving forward. I know the total for the game against the 49ers this weekend is only 44.5. So it's not a particularly high total, but I do think that the Chiefs, their point totals here the last couple of weeks are a little bit inflated from an offensive perspective. Their offense really was not producing that level of effort, and I think it was some of the defensive takeaways and the defensive shutdowns that were helping that offense put up points. Now that's vital in handicapping. You can't ignore when a defense is able to contribute like that, but you certainly can't rely on 2 extra trips inside the 10-yard line from your offense because your defense gets takeaways right there, and you also can't rely on pick sixes each week. So factor that into your understanding of this game from a Chiefs offensive perspective, but also keep in mind this Patriots defense really needs to find themselves here before they host the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday night because Andy Dalton, better at home, much like Joe Flacco, these younger quarterbacks in the AFC North rather, were very good at home, less consistent on the road, but the point being that this is still a potent Cincinnati Bengals offense even on the road, and I'm very interested to see how Bill Belichick and this Patriots defense is able to play against them because they were on the field an awful lot. The Chiefs had the 4th most time of possession of any team this past weekend, so that Patriots defense was worn out on the field there. Now they have to do a quick turnaround and play on Sunday night against the Bengals. Should be quite interesting to see how they ultimately perform in that one. And the other thing, too, is you really can't expect this offense behind a struggling offensive line to actually put up the same level of production that we're accustomed to seeing. So you're going to have to supplement that if you're going to hope to win games, and it's going to have to come from a defense. If your offense can't produce enough, you're going to have to help it out defensively. And to an extent, ironically, we're seeing a similar thing happening down in Dallas, where you talk about an offense there that could produce, but a defense that can't, and a quarterback who was ailing. And so they used their best defense was actually their offense in the ground game and time of possession and being efficient in what they were doing. And that kept their defense fresh and allowed them to build leads on the scoreboard. So even with a subpar defense, you could help them out with your offense. And you don't necessarily need to have huge splash chunk plays. You just need to be efficient offensively. And so that's something I know the Patriots are obviously going to have to work on. They can help out their defense, but that defense is really going to have to figure out ways to step up and to play better. I will add one last thing here before we jump into some of the injuries, that if you guys have been following these podcasts, and I know I reiterated this a few times already, but you already knew about the Patriots. You already knew about their offense. We're basically, this box score analysis, this recapping of some of the advanced metrics of these games and the way we're playing it out, if you're taking notes or listening in every single week, you already knew all of this. You already knew about this Patriots offense struggling. And so while the world got to see it there, and as clients, whichever ones of you guys are clients, you knew what my plays were on this game. You knew why we liked these sides. So I was telling you everything that was going to happen in this game, and to a large extent, that was exactly as it unfolded for the most part. So, these podcasts, I think, are helpful learning tools. Hopefully, you guys feel the same way. It certainly helps me in aiding to share that information with you guys because it makes me do all the research ahead of time, and hopefully then you guys can take advantage of that information because we saw this past weekend in a number of instances play out exactly as you understood from before, whether it's the Cowboys offense and how they're operating, whether it's the Patriots offense and how they're not operating. There's a number of teams, whether you're talking about the Bears and the Packers and the way that offense for the Bears and the Packers were both operating, and how the Bears defense was winning games, not using their defense effectively, and how that can was going to be ripped right open. These are all things that we were previewing and we were telling you, and we're seeing those play out. So it'll be interesting to see how some of the takeaways from this week go into next week's games and how those results will end up looking. But certainly fun to do these things every week, so let's jump right into the injuries. Let's look at some of these injuries. First of all, the Atlanta Falcons, they suffered a couple of injuries to offensive linemen. If you look at Joe Hawley, he's out for the season. He tore up his knee in the game this past weekend. And Lamar Holmes, tackle, they also put him out for the season, put him on the IR, messed up his foot. Carson Palmer for the Arizona Cardinals, he's targeting coming back this week against the Denver Broncos, but let's keep a close eye on how he's progressing and how his rehab does for his shoulder and his nerve issue there. Jump down to the Carolina Panthers. Charles Johnson, he's dealing with a hip injury. As we know, they've already are dealing with another injury to their defensive lineman, actually suspension due to disciplinary reasons. So they're also dealing with Charles Johnson, who messed up his hip. We'll have to see how he is able to recover. And Thomas Davis, he's dealing with a hip injury as well. Looks like the Bengals should get back Vontaze Burfict, but don't know for certain. He suffered a concussion, missed the last game, coming off of a bye week with a big game on deck in New England, so that'll be important to get him back Bruce Carter, linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys, he messed up his quad. They're not sure what's going to happen with him, but they did lose Morris Claiborne, the DB, to a knee injury. He is out for the rest of the season, so that's going to be a loss for that Cowboys secondary. And if Bruce Carter is out, who has been playing okay, he's kind of looked better than maybe his performance actually has been, but he's been at the right place at the right time to grab some interceptions that have been important for the Cowboys. If he misses some time, again, another blow to this defense. He takes on the incapable offense of the Houston Texans this upcoming weekend. Look at the Detroit Lions. Joyce Bell, he suffered a concussion. We'll have to see what's going on with him. Arian Foster, he's been dealing with a hamstring injury for a while now for the Houston Texans, and the team hardly ran for any yardage at all last week against the Bills. That run game was completely grounded, so we'll see what they end up doing with Arian Foster this week. Andre Johnson has a little bit of an ankle going on. We'll see. He's listed as day-to-day right now. LaRon Landry, the weak, puny guy from the Indianapolis Colts, suspended for PED use that nobody saw that one coming. It looks like he might be returning in Week 9. Jacksonville Jaguars lost defensive back Dwayne Grotz to a concussion. We'll see what his status is. They also are dealing with Cecil Shorts out with a hamstring injury most likely this week. The Minnesota Vikings, they play on Thursday. Big key for them is the status of Teddy Bridgewater. Don't know enough right now to understand. I think the coach is hoping he's going to play. Whether or not he does probably will come down to a game-time decision. Game day decision, rather. I'm guessing I'll be able to get a better idea once he tests it out pregame. The New Orleans Saints lost Teron Armstead, one of their offensive tackles, to a concussion. We'll have to see what he ends up doing this upcoming week if he gets to play, but that offensive line certainly could use him. The New York Jets have a couple of DBs that they're unsure when and how these guys are going to return, how long they're going to be out, but Dean Milner and Calvin Pryor, they obviously could use both of those guys immediately, so we'll have to see what happens there. The Oakland Raiders, we know that Derek Carr has messed up his knee. How long is he going to be out? Their starting quarterback, that remains a question mark for the time being. Seattle Seahawks dealing with Zach Miller. They were off of a bye. They're looking at the targeted return for Week 7 for him, so out for a couple more weeks as we're entering Week 5 here. The Bucs lost a couple of guys. Josh McCown, obviously he's dealing with his thumb injury. He's out. Now Mike Glennon's team, but Mike Glennon's not going to have Mike Evans, who he threw the ball to very successfully the last couple of weeks. Mike Evans out with a groin injury for 2 to 3 weeks, so they lose him. And defensively, they lose Sean Golston out of that secondary, dealing with an ankle injury. We'll have to see how long he's out for, but that's a recap of some of the high-level injuries that guys suffered or are dealing with here entering Week 5. With the injuries, with the breakdown of the games last week, let's turn really quick and look at the games this weekend. I think this is a fascinating, highly entertaining weekend of football. College football slate looks great, too. A lot of marquee games, some very good, intriguing matchups. But when you look to the pros, there's some very outstanding matchups, some key battles, a lot of drama this weekend. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of these games. I have a fair number of totals, I think, that are going to be on the card this week. I really like a number of these games. Looking forward to moving those this week. But it starts off Minnesota, Green Bay. Obviously, there are two teams that got much-needed wins last week. I said all preseason, these are the top two teams, I think, from the NFC North. I think these are the teams that are going to be 1 and 2 in the division when the season ends. That has changed, obviously, with the injury to Matt Castle, having to get Teddy Bridgewater in there so early in the season, in addition to having to deal with the loss of Adrian Peterson. I personally think that they can overcome the Bridgewater situation. I like him a lot, and I think he's going to be able to produce for this offense effectively, but it does cause some limitations a little bit because he is so young and was not planning on starting this early, but hey, I think he's going to be fine. My main concern would be the loss of Adrian Peterson, but they more than accounted for him last weekend, so it'll be fascinating to see this team moving forward. They are playing in a very good NFC North division, though, with the Chicago Bears and with the Detroit Lions, both teams 3-1 or 2-2. So that division, there's not a losing team in the NFC North right now. Very competitive division. So this Thursday night game should be highly entertaining. Then on Sunday, excellent slate. Kicks off early with a number of games that I think I'll go ahead and list them in the order that I'm interested in watching the most. Carolina, Chicago should be fascinating to see how both these teams off of bad losses last weekend come out and play. I'm really looking forward to seeing that game. The Atlanta Falcons versus the New York Giants, again, another game where two teams might be going in different directions, but Atlanta's on the road, the Giants are at home, laying 4.5. I'm really looking forward to seeing that matchup. Also, the Baltimore Ravens travel to Indianapolis. The Indianapolis Colts, widely projected by everyone to be the best team in that AFC South. However, guess what? They're only 2-2, and the Houston Texans are sitting at the top of that division at 3-1. So while they may not get challenged from the Tennessee Titans or the Jacksonville Jaguars, this Indianapolis Colts team is being challenged by the Houston Texans, who many didn't give enough of a shot up perhaps to do well in that division. We'll see how they do. They got to win this game against the Baltimore Ravens at home, and Baltimore's trying to keep pace with the Cincinnati Bengals, who are undefeated. So that's going to be a great game. Also looking forward to see the Philadelphia Eagles-St. Louis game. St. Louis didn't play last week. Their offense is playing extremely well, however, and looking to see what that defensive line can do on the road against the Eagles. I think a lot of people are overestimating that defensive line. At least from their performance so far this year, just one sack. However, they get possibly the worst in terms of the most lackluster, beaten down offensive line in the NFL. They do get one of their key starters back, but that team has a number of injuries, including Jason Kelsey is out for the Philadelphia Eagles, and that team ran for, I think it was 2.4 yards per carry, or maybe it was even 1.8 against the San Francisco 49ers last week. So the Rams are going to try to shut down that run game, play that game exactly like the 49ers got the win last weekend against this Eagles team. And you look at a couple other games that obviously intriguing. The only matchup of 3-1 teams this weekend, the Houston Texans at Dallas Cowboys. Battle of Texas should be a fun one to see, although it's not on my top priority list. I do want to see how the Dallas Cowboys defense fares against the Houston Texans. And you look at the New Orleans Saints and Tampa Bay Bucks. Who would have thought 2-1-3 teams entering the season, and people were high on the Bucks and the Saints. Both teams find themselves at 1-3. A loss would be detrimental to either team, and both of them in different directions after the game last week. The Saints got crushed. The Bucks huge road upset, so that should be interesting to watch. When you go to the 4 o'clock games, I think there's 2 very good games and one game that I'm not as interested in. Really looking forward to see this Denver-Arizona game in Denver. That should be fascinating. Arizona, one of the last of the undefeated teams in the NFL, the only one from the NFC who's undefeated. And then this Kansas City-San Francisco matchup. Both teams off of much-needed victories last weekend. Obviously, the Chiefs working on a short week from playing on Monday night, playing the San Francisco 49ers. That game should be pretty entertaining to watch. And the Jets play the Chargers. More than anything, just interested to see how the Jets fare on the road here. We know that the Chargers struggled last weekend against the Jacksonville Jaguars, 0-4 in the red zone. Game still went over the total. Should have sailed over, but the Chargers struggled against that bad defense of the Jacksonville Jaguars in the red zone. So the Jets have a better red zone defense. Should be interesting to see how the Jets fare out on the West Coast, catching 6.5 to 7 points currently. Of course, great Sunday night game. I don't think you could provide much better theater. Undefeated Cincinnati Bengals playing a Bill Belichick, Tom Brady-led team, also probably the worst humiliating loss in their tenure there, particularly because it was on primetime Monday Night Football, getting totally beat down, and the way and manner in which they were beat down makes for compelling theater on Sunday Night Football. And then Monday night, are the Redskins going to lay another huge egg on primetime national TV like they did against the Giants last Thursday? I'm not sure. They have a couple extra days to prepare, but guess what? The Seattle Seahawks are off of a bye, so they have even more time to prepare for the Redskins. What are you going to get out of Kirk Cousins going up against that defense for Seattle? Should be interesting to watch, if nothing else. Definitely a great way to cap off the weekend, but I think a lot of those games on Sunday are going to be very fascinating, entertaining from a fan perspective, but more than anything, I see some good value on the board, so I'm looking forward to this weekend from a betting perspective as well. So with all that said, appreciate you guys tuning in each and every week. Feel free to share feedback as you see fit, but I'm doing this and putting all this time and effort into it for free for all you guys to take advantage of some of this information. Hope you guys are enjoying that for the time being, and good luck this week in Week 5.
This is gonna be a fun ride. This is gonna be a fun ride.
Everybody want clap.
I'm gonna play when I wanna play, do what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. Take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody want clap. One clap. One clap. One clap.